Now Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples aside on the road and said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. And the third day he will rise again. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we meditate on these words of the Lord Jesus spoken just weeks before his crucifixion, as he spells out again and again to his disciples what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem. Now, when he'd first told Peter back in chapter 16 that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day, Peter protested. Far be it from you, this can't happen to you, he said. But Jesus had said, Get behind me, Satan. You are an offence to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. And challenged him, and indeed us, If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. And so Jesus had said, not only must I go and be killed, but you must be prepared to die as well. You must deny your own will to follow Jesus' will. And then on several occasions in the intervening period, he has told them this same story. His discussion on the mountaintop was about the events that would take place in Jerusalem, Luke tells us. And as they came down the mountain, he said, The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and the third day he will be raised up. Now he's spelling it out a little bit more precisely, and he is deliberately taking them aside to raise the matter with them. We are going up to Jerusalem. John in his gospel makes it plain that the disciples were a bit nervous about going up to Jerusalem because last time they were there, they were threatened. And much of this immediate time before Jesus went up to Jerusalem, he was in a kind of hiding, because the chief priests had put out a decree. If anyone knows where he is, you must tell us so that we can arrest him. And so the disciples were very conscious that they were under threat and that Jesus was under threat. But they recognized that he was the Messiah, he was the King, he was going to come out victorious. Although they couldn't understand this aspect of the fact that him dying and rising again. What does rising again mean? Well, this time Jesus says, we're going up to Jerusalem. There the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests. So this idea of betrayal, and Jesus knew from the beginning who it was who would betray him. One of them would betray him. But they couldn't get their head around that as well. Surely each of them was fully committed to the Lord Jesus. Only he knew who it was who would betray him. But the point he was making is that they were not in danger just from somebody else outside attacking them that they couldn't know anything about. It would be one of their own number who would set the ball rolling. One to whom they would entrust their lives would betray Jesus. One of them would betray him. He would be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes. Having been betrayed to them, as he said earlier, he would be abused by the elders, the chief priests and scribes. They would come together in council, and they will condemn him to death. So it is the leaders of the nation who would repudiate their king, who would deny that Jesus is the Christ, and they would deny that he is the Son of God. Not that he was any kind of power threat to them, except that the people were following Jesus rather than acknowledging them. And so they felt threatened by a person who was not threatening them at all, and they would condemn him to death. Jesus knew what lay ahead of him, but that didn't turn him back. Paul, 20 years later, gets much criticism because he went up to Jerusalem when he knew that he would be under a threat as well. Indeed, everywhere he went, the Christians were telling him that when he went up to Jerusalem, he would be arrested. So don't go, Paul. That didn't dissuade him from going up to Jerusalem. He believed it was God's will for him to go. He wanted to go up to Jerusalem. Surely that was the city of God. And the Lord would look after him, whatever would happen in that city, was his confidence. About 15 years ago, I went to Israel at a time when there was a fair bit of strife. Israel has always had many tourists, but at that particular time the tourists were turning away. The plane that I was scheduled to go on never flew because so many planes had been cancelled. The tourist excursion that I planned to go to Masada didn't happen because there were so few tourists who were interested in going to Masada. There was potentially dangerous. But I went, even though many had turned away for fear of what might happen to them. I don't think I was foolhardy, even though I did go into Bethlehem to visit an Australian missionary working there. I didn't take any unreasonable risks and nothing terribly unreasonable happened to me. But it was an opportunity that I had, and God opened the door for me to go, to meet with Jewish scientists and some Christian people, and to understand a little bit more about the Jewish mind. There are dangerous situations, and we need not to be foolhardy in going up to them. But we need to realise that we don't always turn away just because there is a threat. It is Satan who uses threats of danger to intimidate people away from doing what is right. Indeed, every soldier, as he puts on his uniform, every policeman, as he puts on his uniform, knows that something could happen today. Doesn't mean that they don't do their job. They have a job to do and they go and do it. Being responsible for the threats, being aware of what might happen. Jesus knew what would happen, but it was a great part of God's plan to save men and women. He knew he had to do it. The whole pattern of the Old Testament pointed to Jesus doing these things. He was the sacrificial lamb, going as a lamb to the slaughter without protest. He knew he would be slaughtered, but he knew the third day he would rise again. But not only did he know that something bad might happen to him, he knew the details. The chief priests and the scribes would lead the charge against him. They would condemn him to death. A Jewish acquaintance of mine protests when I say that the Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus. They feel very much the consequences that have come upon them for this. They didn't actually execute him, though. They handed him over to the Romans. And so the Romans were the ones who actually executed him. They mocked Jesus. They scourged Jesus. And they crucified Jesus, as we'll see as we proceed through the account. And so Jews and Gentiles are equally responsible. We're all responsible, for we have all sinned and come short of the glory of God. But it's not possible for death to dominate the Lord Jesus, because there was no sin in him. And so he knew the third day he would rise again. The pattern was shown throughout the Old Testament. The story of Joseph, rejected by his brothers, who symbolically at least killed him, but he was exalted to be their ruler, to save them. The story of David, being rejected by Saul and the nation, condemned to death, but ultimately exalted as king. The story of Jonah, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, a great picture of death and resurrection. The rejection and the exaltation of the one who was God's servant. We're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes. They will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. and the third day he will rise again.